Hello there, my name is Yvonne and today we're gonna see writing tips for B2 and C1 and even for C2. This video is not intended for beginners. So I'm going to teach you some phrases that you can use in order to make your writings be more sophisticated so you can have a better marking in the writing section. So let's see. Useful expressions to introduce a topic. It can be said that, it can be inferred that. For example, it can be said that global warming is an issue that affects everybody around the globe. For example, it goes without saying, the same. It goes without saying that global warming is an issue that affects everyone around the globe. For example, it is often said, it is often claimed that, it is often asserted that. One can point out the fact that, or one can highlight the fact that, okay? The author revolves around the idea that, and for example, maybe this one will be if they're asking for a book review. The author, for example, maybe Shakespeare, revolves around the idea that. The topic, for example, if we're talking about globalization has poured rivers of ink over the years, or globalization has caused rivers of ink to flow. And these two are like very poetic, you know? And another one, a number of key issues arise when dealing with global warming. For example, a number of key issues arise when talking about global warming, for example. Okay, so this could be some useful phrases when you want to introduce a topic. Now, when we're comparing, instead of saying the first, the second, the first, the second, we can use the words the former, the latter. The former means the first one, and the latter means the second one. So, for example, we can say this like the former describes, blah, 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 or the former deals with, blah, 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 whereas the latter highlights, okay? So we're comparing there the first and the second. The typical ones maybe can be as opposed to. So the first one describes this as opposed to the second one that states on the contrary, in contrast. Now, another way we can compare is despite the fact that, in spite of the fact that, although, even though, and notwithstanding that, subject plus verb. So let's see. Notwithstanding that Cadiz was a good team, Oviedo won the match. Despite the fact that Cadiz was a good team, Oviedo won the match. Even though Cadiz was a good team, Oviedo won the match. Now remember, when we're using despite by itself and in spite of by itself and notwithstanding by itself, we're going to be using a noun or a pronoun or a verb in the ing, not a real action verb. So, despite Cadiz being a good team, Oviedo won the match. Now, if we want to emphasize or we want to talk about something that we spoke about before, we can use these phrases. As I have previously mentioned, as mentioned previously, as it has been mentioned before, as previously stated or as previously explained, referring to the previous point, going back to what was said before. From the previous point, it can be inferred that, or from the previous point it can be said that, from the previous point it can be stated that, from the previous point it can be highlighted that, from the previous point it can be expected that, and then you're gonna continue your writing, right? So to give more examples, instead of saying for example, which is the thing that people tend to use, sometimes people use for instance for a change, which is good, but we have to be more creative here. So another idea that immediately springs to mind is, another idea that immediately comes to mind is, or another factor that immediately springs to mind is, another factor that immediately comes to mind is, another aspect that immediately springs to mind is, another factor that immediately comes to mind is, another feature that immediately springs to mind is, or you can say another feature that immediately comes to mind is, and the last one, another characteristic that immediately springs to mind is, or another characteristic that immediately comes to mind is. And here we have an example. Another idea that immediately springs to mind when talking about learning English is that it provides you with the opportunity to broaden your social horizons. Okay, so this would be something that maybe the writers, not the examiners would expect in a C1 exam. But if you can write something like this for the B2, well, you will have an excellent mark, right? So, opinion. Instead of saying I think, and sometimes I believe, you can say something like this. For me, the gist of the matter is that. For me, the key element is that. For me, the most relevant aspect is that. Okay, so instead of my opinion, I think that. Speaking my mind, this is another typical one. For example, speaking my mind regarding global warming is that it's a problem that affects everyone around the globe. However, we can somehow solve it if we work together. So something like this. For my part, global warming is an issue that affects everyone around the globe. However, if everybody works together, this problem can be solved. Okay, now when we want to emphasize a negative thing, we can use the word drawback, disadvantage, negative aspect, downside, con. For example, you can say the downside of children going to school in the afternoon is that they don't spend enough time with their parents. Or the drawback that children have to go back to school in the afternoon is that they don't spend enough time with their parents. Or the disadvantage, a disadvantage for kids going back to school in the afternoon would be that they don't spend enough time with their parents, something like that. Okay, positive, when you want to emphasize something positive, one evident benefit or one evident advantage or one evident pro. Okay, and this could be something that you can say when you are like comparing advantages and disadvantages, like the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, or the disadvantages, if there are more disadvantages, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. Very good. Now to write summary, so most of the time is in summary, so you can use something like succinctly. Succinctly means briefly. Succinctly, it can be stated that in a nutshell, it means to sum up, or you can use all in all. Now also you have to use a lot of adjectives, right? So for example, I like the adjective of spellbound. Spellbound means like fascinated. And for example, flabbergasted and astonished mean like speechless. I was flabbergasted, like I was speechless. I was so astonished. For example, identified, horrified, breathtaking. You have to use a lot of adjectives. Don't forget that. Other connectors, either or, neither or, both, and not only, but also don't forget to use connectors. Also, another thing that I can tell you, write sometimes conditionals. Okay, examiners are expecting conditionals, and most likely inverted conditionals. We have a video on inverted conditionals, so maybe you would like to watch that. And and maybe some passives. That's that for today. So this is just a brief summary on how to make your writing a little bit better, like some phrases that you can use. So I hope that you liked the video. Thumbs up if you did, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Okay, so goodbye, take care.